So I went to Italy, and being a lifelong cocksucker, being a longtime fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I had to tweak my itinerary a little to go visit as many places as I could that were featured in JoJo's Part 5, which takes place in Italy. And boy, did I regret every part of that decision.
Even when against the fate of God, fly the flag of the rebellion, gangsta. Oh yeah.
So the first stop on my trip through Italy was Venice, the city on the water. The gross, disgusting, 1,000 years of shit-filled water. But as long as you never go in the water, although that's getting harder, Venice is a really beautiful city that does actually live up to the hype, in my opinion. At least more than, Paris. There isn't actually any record of Venice's founding we can find, but based on legends and more indirect sources of evidence, we can kind of figure out that Venice was founded by refugees of northern Italian cities during the successive waves of barbarian invasions into Italy back during the fall of Rome. The city is built in the Venetian lagoon, comprising around 126 islands separated by canals and linked by 472 bridges. The islands are partially man-made, with each of the sandy or marshy islands having a foundation laid on top of it by driving the trunks of alder trees into the mud and sand until they were anchored into clay. This wood was used as a frame to build the limestone platforms most of the city is built on today. Dating from 568, Venice came under the rule of a governing body that would eventually become the Republic of Venice, represented by the Doge. R.I.P. in peace. Being out in the water made Venice basically unassailable by external powers, and in its isolation, had far more autonomy and freedom than other Italian cities. Particularly freedom from all the dumbass feuds that consumed Italy during the Middle Ages, when they weren't telling the Holy Roman Empire to fuck off.
Fight back! Fight back! Fight back!
This independence allowed Venice to rise to dominance as a maritime power over the course of the Middle Ages and the early modern period. Notably, Venice's position in the Adriatic allowed it to act as an intermediary between the kingdoms of Western Europe and the Eastern Roman Empire. From the 9th to the 12th centuries, Venice began rapidly expanding its territory to a coastline empire, including the Venetian Plain, Istria, Dalmatia, the Peloponnese, and many Greek islands like Corfu, Kefalonia, Crete, Cyprus, and Euboea. By the 13th century, it was the most prosperous city in all of Europe. However, once the Byzantine Empire was destroyed and Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, Venice's big trade partner to the east was gone. And after the fall of Constantinople, the Ottomans launched a series of wars that cost Venice most of its empire. This, plus 2 successive waves of the Black Death, the lockdown on eastern trade by the Ottomans, and the discovery of the Americas all contributed to Venice's dwindling significance, eventually forcing them out of international trade and into manufacturing during the 18th century. The Republic of Venice would eventually fall after Napoleon conquered the city, and it swapped hands between Napoleon and Austria until Napoleon's death, when it became an Austrian territory. The Republic was quickly re-established in a little blip in and out from the grave in 1848, which lasted only about 17 months. Eventually, the Wars of Italian Independence would see Venice come under the rule of the newly established Kingdom of Italy. Today, it's a UNESCO heritage site for all its architecture and history, especially with how climate change, over-tourism, and pollution have been affecting the city's ability to quite literally keep its head above water. So that explains why the lagoon is kind of gross.
Thank you for flying Ryanair.
So I flew into Venice from Barcelona because it was really cheap at the time, and this was the first time I'd ever really traveled on my own. So I kind of knew my way around an airport, right? But when it comes to public transit, now would probably be a good time to mention that I come from the backwater boonies of bumfuck nowhere, Ohio. Anyway, I managed to get on the bus that takes you from Marco Polo Airport to Venice proper, and here was where I found my first JoJo attraction, the bridge where the White Album fight took place. The frankly underwhelming nature of the bridge and the fact that I could really only see the side of the bridge through my window on the bus should have been a sign that traveling for JoJo memes was a bad idea, but I was insistent. I'm dropped off at the part of the city where cars are no longer allowed and begin to make my way towards my first ever hostel using nothing but the written address and the memory of its location on a map because I hadn't yet bought a SIM card. I just knew I had to head south and keep an eye out for bus stations. Though see, there's a problem with that, because the key word right there is bus station. My dumbass looked out at all these canals and the car-free zone and thought, I wonder where all the buses are. Venice has no buses. Well, it does, it has water buses, but I didn't know that. In spite of knowing about water taxis, garbage boats, ambulance boats, and police boats, and but I'm walking. And I keep walking. And I keep walking. I passed a couple of communists, which was weird, but their eyes are only sensitive to people who have a desire to work hard, so as long as I kept my head empty and didn't associate with them, it was fine. And then I start thinking, maybe this city is a bit bigger than I thought. But I kept walking. All the while dragging a suitcase, not a backpack. Yes, my first backpacking trip was made with a suitcase. I regret it every day. At first, I had a lot of people who had gotten off the bus with me, going in the general same direction I was walking, so I felt good about my decision. But the further south I went, the fewer and fewer people were with me, until I was alone. I eventually looked at the address and found out that Giudecca, where my hostel was located, is an island wholly removed from the main city of Venice. So I had to find a way across, after walking for about 3 hours. My first thought was water taxi. It's not that far for a speedboat, it's like, what, a minute? So I asked one of the water taxis how much it would be to take me across the canal, and this fucking guy hits me with the 50 euros and I'll take you. Absolutely fucking not. That is absurd. So I keep walking along the southern coast, my hostel, ever so close yet so far, and that's when I found my first water bus station. A small, little tin box floating off a dock. At last. Public transport. And they were having a strike. Who would have thunk? Anyway, I already don't know how this public transport system works, so I give the machine some of my money and sit in the station, hoping someone will be along to take me to the island. And would you look at that? I finally got to Giudecca. Except I'm on the opposite side of this island because of the altered routes due to the strike. So more walking for me. I think I got something like 35,000 steps in that day. Anyway, I eventually get to my hostel and the people look at me after having been wandering out there for upwards of 3 hours and hit me with the room isn't ready yet. So I stole my luggage and fuck off. First thing I need is water, and then bug spray, because the mosquitoes are fucking everywhere, kind of unsurprisingly. So I used the hotel Wi-Fi to smartly take a photo of the route on the map to the places I want to go this time, and managed to complete all my errands before heading back to the mainland to get a SIM card. I say the mainland, it's another fucking island. You know what I mean. I think I paid like $45 or something for 70 gigs of data, which is way more than I needed. And I wanted to save it to use it again the next time I went because I might be heading off to Europe again, and Northern Italy is part of the itinerary. But my new phone can only use eSIMs, so they can charge me more money for less data. I was fine with my SE. But no, T-Mobile was like, oh, you should upgrade. It's so great. Yeah, it's free. And I was like, sure, my battery's getting kind of bad. And, I'd rather have a free phone instead of paying $40 for a battery replacement. And this is what I get. Okay, whatever. Now, the hostel I was staying at was my first ever hostel experience, and all things considered, it was pretty good. But If you ever decide to use a hostel world in your future, all I want to say is that the rating system is a lie. Not that it doesn't tell you anything, just that people rate hostels the way, like, women rate other women. So once you go below an 8, you should really, really reconsider your stay. The place I stayed at was called Generator Venice. Generator is a chain of hostels that has hostels all over Western Europe and nearby popular tourist destinations. I don't actually know what country they're based out of, since other chains like St. Christopher's are obviously based out of London, and I think A&O is based out of Germany, and Meiningen, I think is how you pronounce that, is based out of also Germany. Probably, obviously, if not Austria. I haven't seen a... Whatever. The Generator I stayed in was perfectly serviceable. Once you get used to the water buses, it's actually a pretty great location. But chain hostels tend to be just okay. There are a lot of hostels that kind of look shabby but have 9-star plus reviews, and those reviews aren't for nothing. Most of the time it's the atmosphere. If you like traveling to party, chain hostels will do just fine. Most drunk Brits on holiday and Aussie crackheads can be found at chain hostels, so you'll probably have a good time. But that's not really my speed, so I generally look to stay in locally owned or independent hostels. Also, the odds of finding a really cool building that a hostel is based out of goes up way higher once you move away from the chains. Now, while the hostel itself was fine, my room was not. The room had like 16 people or something, which is way too much. 10 is usually the optimal number for a dorm, give or take 2. And we had a snore those first few nights that rivaled the power of Chainsaw Man, the colloquial name for a Korean man I had the pleasure of sleeping next to in Turkey. The air conditioning didn't work, so we had to open the windows to ventilate the room. Only problem was that this gave the mosquitoes free reign all night. I could lather myself in poison and still wake up with something like 30 bug bites. I later found out that this was the room that all the Americans were put into. The only non-American in there was a Dutch woman who I later found out had dual citizenship in America. Now, I can't prove that this was on purpose, but it's a hell of a coincidence. Oh, one last complaint. The gender markers on the bathrooms were kind of the exact same, except for one little change. I kid you not. The men's room had a tiny pair of legs, and that was it. Look at that. Look at that and tell me that's different enough. Ordinarily, I wouldn't complain about this, but for the keen-minded among you, you could probably see where this is going. First day in a new country, new town, new hostel, I wind up accidentally walking in on a girl in the bathroom because I thought it was the male sign. Thank you, Generator Venice. Very cool. There's more to that story, but I'll get to it later. Anyway, I get settled and immediately decide to forget that I have social anxiety for some reason and go grab a drink at a nearby cafe with another guy from the America room who gives me a ton of tips about how to see the city. Thing is, I don't actually remember what those tips are, but I know I used them. So thanks, guy. He left like that day. As you could probably imagine, I didn't hang out with him that much. Since I had a ticket for the Doge's Palace in the morning, I decided to take the day off and just rest up and socialize. I ended up meeting this Dutch guy who, for some reason, offered to take me on a night tour of the city, and for some reason, I said yes. Anyway, that brought us back to the main city, where we just scampered around Venice in the dark, because I had no idea where anything was at that point. But we managed to get some cool pictures and cool sights, and caught the last water bus back to Giudecca, which was kind of a perilous risk considering my experiences earlier in the day.
2:30 a.m. Time to rise and grind.
I woke up early that day because if there's something I hate more than commies, it's waiting in line. I bought tickets for both the Doge's Palace and St. Mark's Basilica well in advance, so I get up and head to St. Mark's Square and manage to nab a picture of this lion on a pole, which was also in JoJo's and incorrectly placed at a different part of the city. I ended up being about third in line to enter the palace 15 minutes before it opens at 9, and holy shit was that the right decision. See, even without the lines, if I waited to see the place until, like, a peak tourist time, I would have been squished into a stream of bodies being shoved around the palace like a fucking lazy river. But going early in the morning, barely anyone was there. Myself and those who had arrived before opening had made something of a silent pact, I guess, to just kind of avoid each other and take in the splendor of this place in peace. The first ducal palace for the Doge of Venice burned down sometime in the 10th century, which we have no traces of. A second palace was built out of a fortress near St. Mark's Square, which also got destroyed, but some of the Byzantine-influenced architecture can still be seen on the first floor of the modern palace. A third and final palace was constructed in the 1300s using Gothic-style architecture, but that palace subsequently caught on fire 2 more times! I mean, come on, guys! You're the city on the water! While the palace was the residence of the Doge, it was also the place that held almost all of Venice's political institutions. Now, I'm not an architecture nerd or an art nerd, so I can't give you all the details about, the paintings and the building and shit, but I can show you what's in the museum, and if you happen to be an architecture nerd or an art nerd, you can splooge about that for yourselves. Also, there's a huge section dedicated just to weapons, and if you've ever seen me go through the Cleveland Art Museum, you know exactly how I feel about this. That fucking thing, I guess. If you thought the compass room or the armory was cool, you haven't seen the council chambers. Connected to the palace is the Venetian dungeon with the Bridge of Sighs, so called because apparently people like to sigh when they're about to be executed, and Venetians like to be cute and cheeky when they kill people. Anyway, I appropriately sighed on the Bridge of Sighs, of course because I too am cheeked up. There was a lot of cutlery and kitchenware and old shoes in the prison, and overall, like, as a museum, aside from the actual prison part, this side isn't as great as the other one, but it's still cool. But yeah, I would say the Doge's Palace is definitely worth visiting. The artwork in the council chambers on camera isn't even remotely close to how cool it is in real life. That shit is ginormous.
Guys, this orange is Gigantosaurus, or whatever you say, Gigantosaurus, Gigantosaurus, Metamorphic, Gigantosaurus.
Definitely on the top of my list for attractions in Venice. Anyway, by the time I was done with the palace, it wasn't quite lunchtime yet, and there was one last JoJo site I needed to make a pilgrimage to. The Church of San Giorgio Maggiore. Actually, it might be Maggiore. I don't do Latin languages. Man, I know Norwegian, German, Mandarin.
Hi, everyone.
And Arabic. Don't ask me to speak Italian. Memes aside, the church is actually pretty damn cool, especially on the inside. I mean, it has its own island for a reason. It's a 16th century church that used to be a monastery designed by Andrea Palladio, who I recently learned Johann von Goethe has a huge hard-on for as I'm reading through his Italian journey. While I couldn't go down the elevator like they do in the show, I could take it up to the bell tower for a pretty sweet view. That evening, I ran into the Dutch woman from my room, who was the same woman I accidentally walked in on in the bathroom. And psych. We decided to go find a restaurant and have dinner together, and eventually ended up taking a walk around the outer edges of the city, which I haven't seen yet. I discovered that wherever you find tourists, you will find cock paraphernalia. I also found out that Venice has parks, which were really cool to see at sunset, and then we both found out that Venice has ghettos, which were really uncool to see at night. Day 3. I woke up early on day 3 again because today I was supposed to go see San Marco, and that shit always has a huge ass line. Even though I got there early and bought my ticket in advance, I still ended up waiting like half an hour and was thrown into a lazy river of bodies. That said, a lot of the appeal for San Marco comes from what's above you. It's so Byzantine. Almost insultingly Byzantine. In fact, I think Venice has the largest collection of Byzantine art that's the best preserved in the world, because iconoclasm and the Turks did not hit Venice. There's just so much gold, and there's so many icons that this place, I think deadass just hurts to look at, but like in a good way. See, in the early part of this trip, I was real snooty about which places I went to go see, figuring every popular tourist destination was overrated garbage that I could afford to skip. I have since learned my lesson and ended up missing a lot, but San Marco was the one super popular tourist attraction that I had to see for a very simple reason. See, way back in the day when Mark the Evangelist died, he died in Egypt and was buried there. Fast forward a few hundred years, and Venice is building their snazzy new basilica in the center of town, and they want something to give it that, pilgrimage value. Conveniently, Alexandria and the rest of Egypt are now under Muslim rule, while St. Mark's body is still there. So the Doge sends 2 Venetian merchants to pull a heist where they dig up St. Mark's body and smuggle it onto their ship by hiding it under layers of pork that the Muslim customs guards won't touch. Call this mission impossible. Rogue Merchant. They sail it back to Venice, and that's how this box now has a body of a saint in it. It was funny enough to where I kinda just had to go. Also, this place is just cool. That night, I ended up talking to some people out on the patio, and at the insistence of some people who had never even heard of Ohio, I made a tourism ad.
Okay, go.
So you've heard of New York and Los Angeles, but those places are full of shit and bad people. Come to Ohio, we have cornfields, crime rates, the Cincinnati Zoo, and I think like 8 presidents. We have one gorge, it's called the Gorge because it's the only one. And Cedar Point. We have Cedar Point.
OTA, call me. The next 2 days I didn't do much in the way of major sightseeing. I didn't have to spend 4 whole days in Venice, and to be honest, I really shouldn't have, but I was fine with it. I ate pretty much every meal with that Dutch woman whose name I do remember, but am leaving out for the sake of privacy. On the second to last day, when she had to leave, she told me she had been feeling kind of dizzy and thought it was heat stroke, so I ended up spending all day with her to make sure that, she didn't pass out and fall into a canal. But eventually she left, and I prepared to make my next stop in Rome.
Thank you for flying Ryanair.
Only I hit a little snag. I just remembered to look at the reviews for my hostel, which I had already booked because I am an intelligent traveler who is very knowledgeable. And turns out the reviews were awful. Not only that, but what the Dutch woman had wasn't heat stroke. It was COVID.